here, and especially thankful to the victims of communism for really shining a bright light on decades after decade, decade after decade, of atrocities committed all over the world by communist dictatorships. It is a record that so often goes missed in the United States and Europe and all over the world, and you are chronicling and making us more vigilant and making us push back even harder against the atrocities that they have committed, that there be an accountability, and hopefully some kind of reconciling with those who have suffered and their families do need our support, but also that it doesn't happen again. So thank you so much for that. I have a few opening comments, and then I'd like to go to the presentation. I've been asked to speak, so I love and would take this opportunity, particularly as we remember Tiananmen Square. You know, we are gathered here to solemnly remember Tiananmen Square, the protests, and then the violent suppression. You know, weeks went by. It looked like there might be a change of heart by the part of the communist dictatorship there. We saw it in the Soviet Union, we saw it in Romania, all over the East Bloc countries, yet it didn't happen, sadly, in China. We remember the massacre every year because there has been no justice whatsoever for those who lost lives and limbs, like Fang Zheng, seeking freedom and reform. We remember Tiananmen because of its enduring impact on U.S.-China relations. We must never forget these seminal events, no matter how much the Chinese government wants the world to forget it. You might recall, some of you, in 1996, I held a series of hearings, began in 2006, on how Google and all these other internet giants, Google especially with their search engine, which is probably one of the best in the world, overtly and aggressively censoring all things Tiananmen. If you use the Google in China, you got wonderful pictures of happy people visiting the square. Use Google here, you got pictures of tanks, bayonets, and people suffering for liberty. So unfortunately, there's been complicity by many, including the corporate community, for decades, and that was just another major example. We also, the world, owes a debt to the leaders of Tiananmen, and they did something that was so heroic. While it did not yield the fruit we were all hoping for, I do believe that that day will come. The Communist Party of China, through bayonets and tanks and killings and torture and tracking down the people who were there, it wasn't just those couple of days. Of course, they continued. Anybody with a fax machine was tracked down. They were looking constantly for people who were part of this great protest. China today, as we all know, is richer and more powerful, more menacing. I've held a series of hearings on Chinese influence around the world, whether it be in Africa, Latin America, or anywhere else. What are they doing? Bringing a bad governance model and the use of surveillance and secret police, and it works in dictatorships especially. Look at what has happened in Sudan. Look what they have done in Iran. Where do you think those capabilities largely have come from? The Chinese model. There is now a war on law, as we call it, a war on religion. And Xi Jinping, sadly, right now is in a race to the bottom with Kim in North Korea when it comes to human rights abuses. We've seen it. I chair the China Commission. We're looking every year. Our report becomes even more breathtakingly horrible because of what's going on in these countries, in this country, I should say, in every single category. Religion's freedom, the international community and their linkage to NGOs, which has been severed, or at least attempted to be severed. So there's an all-out war on the people of China, and I think the point was made earlier that we don't talk about, China and the people are wonderful. It's the government, unfortunately, that is doing such grave injury to its own people. Mention was made earlier by Mr. Suinger about, a little bit of a timeline, and Dr. Yang did it as well. I was also a part of that. In 1989, like everyone else, was glued to my seat. This could be the beginning. Not unlike what we saw when the Berlin Wall fell and all of the changes that occurred in Eastern Europe and in what was the Soviet Union in Russia itself. Sadly, it took a bad turn to the worst. I agreed, I'm a Republican, when Bill Clinton said that George Herbert Walker Bush was coddling dictatorship in a famous speech that President Clinton had made as a candidate. And then, frankly, he betrayed the people of China. I remember when he did his executive order. We had the votes in the House to take away most favored nation status. We had the votes. It was an open question whether or not we'd have him in the Senate. And we had a president who looked ready to sign the moment that legislation crossed his desk. At a critical moment, he issued an executive order that said, give him a year, laid out all of these benchmarks that seemingly were achievable. I, as a Republican, took to the microphone over and over again, floor of the House, press conferences, worked with David Bonnier and Nancy Pelosi and Frank Wolf and others, Republicans, Democrats alike, saying, thank you, Mr. President, for putting a bright line of demarcation where America will not be complicit in those atrocities. On May 24th, 1994, on a Friday afternoon when everybody was leaving, you know, Congress was out, everybody was on trains and buses, not buses, cars, and certainly jets to the West Coast and elsewhere. He does an executive order evisceration, rips it in half. Significant regression had occurred, not progress, as called for in the executive order, and the people of China were the losers. I, to this day, believe that's when the Chinese took the measure of the United States of America and said, we put profits above human rights, the rule of law, and respect for the individual. And it was a grave and sad day. By then, the coalition that had really rallied around the president began to dissipate. And it looked like now we're not going to get a removal of MFN because even the president now has said there's no linkage between human rights and trade. Of course, the business community were celebrating, and there was this naive thought that somehow if you just trade more, a dictatorship would matriculate from a gross dictatorship littered with laogai and torture would somehow become a democracy, and nothing could have been further from the truth in terms of what has happened and what many of us predicted would happen. I was appalled when President Bill Clinton brought in 1996, Che Haitian, the butcher of Beijing, the man who ordered the killings. He brought him, he was now Secretary of Defense, or the equivalent of the Secretary of Defense for all of China. And what did he do? Gave him a 19-gun salute. Well, I put together a hearing. Dr. Yang was one of our lead witnesses, was brilliant that day. It was December 18th, 1996. We invited Che Haitian, or anybody from the Chinese embassy, to come and give testimony. Because what did he say at the War College while he was here? Nobody died during Tiananmen Square. I mean, you can get away with that, Che Haitian, when you are in China, but at least we do have a semblance of a free press here still. And we held that hearing. We had somebody from the People's Daily who actually started to write about this as it was happening. He was hauled off and thrown into jail. Somehow he got out, and won't explain it, got out and came and testified. We had somebody from Time Magazine, all these people, students, testifying, and the empty chair for Che Haitian. I thought that was a gross sellout, continue to believe that to this day. The enabling has been bipartisan, as is the opposition and the clarity that has come from so many of us who believe if you put human rights first, the rest should follow thereafter, including better trading with that country. Let me just conclude by saying that I believe someday, and I don't believe it's that far off, there will be a celebration of democracy in China. It'll happen because the people of China, who are tenacious, courageous, we see it in the leaders, Dr. Yang, obviously, and so many others who have suffered so much, Wei Jingsheng, Chen Guangchen, all of these great leaders who have suffered so much, and yet they continue to push for democracy. Liu Xiaobo, who recently passed, his wife, here he is, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and the world kind of forgot about him. I was the one who led the effort in the House to name him, of course, having Václav Havel and so many others pulling for him to get that prize. We had asked that 3 people get it, but Liu Xiaobo got it, and that's the way it should be. I was at the celebration, which had an empty chair again there for the Nobel Peace Prize, and then people kind of forgot about it. Where was the outrage over a dictatorship that jails a great and wonderful non-violent man like Liu Xiaobo, and then does such horrible things to his wife, and then allows him to die a horrible death from cancer by not treating him? But again, these folks will all be honored someday, as they should be, for the leadership they have provided. Today, I'm introducing a bill and it's called the Countering the Chinese Government and Communist Party's Political Influence Operations Act. It calls for a major research done by interagency of the federal government that will tell us exactly what they're doing in every area, from the Confucius Institutes, and I've held several hearings on that, as well as how other universities like NYU and others are now getting campuses in China at almost rock bottom price and have the students subsidized. What are they teaching? What are the Confucius Institutes providing in terms of soft power on the part of the Chinese government? We know it's there, we know it's rampant, but we want a really historic landmark study, so that, and it has to be made public, not something done by the FBI that we never see, so that everyone can rally around it. Nancy Kapter, who's the co-chair of our caucus, she's the chief Democrat co-sponsor, and we're introducing that later today. I've been asked, and this is a real privilege, to make a presentation today, and I'm concluding on that. In 1989, as I know all of you know, Fang Zheng and a group of his fellow students were peacefully protesting in Tiananmen Square when they were hit with tear gas. Mr. Fang selflessly and heroically risked his life to pick up on an unconscious girl and to push her to safety and out of the way of an oncoming tank. The tank crushed both of his legs, which had to be amputated. The pain was excruciating. Despite this horrific crime that he suffered, Mr. Fang went on to win two gold medals, and broke 2 regional records in the All-China Disabled Athletic Games in 1992. His spirit remained as indomitable as his body. Mr. Fang refused to say his legs were crushed in a road incident. The Chinese government wanted him to lie, despite their efforts to pressure him to do so. They did that by denying him his diploma and later barring him from representing China as an athlete with a disability. Mr. Fang is a living reminder of the terrible massacre that the Chinese Communist Party continues to claim never happened, and for this, he was bullied for 20 years. After surviving 2 decades of harassment and surveillance, he started his new life in exile in 2009. Since coming to the U.S., Mr. Fang has been a tireless advocate for freedom in China. Mr. Fang presides over the Chinese Democracy Education Foundation, which calls for the establishment of democracy and respect for human rights in China. And he has testified in front of the Congressional Executive Commission on China and other bodies of the House, calling on what happened in Tiananmen Square, but also on his dreams and hopes as to where China will go. That is to democracy. For his unflagging fight against tyranny and his commitment to freedom, Mr. Fang is receiving the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation Human Rights Award. Other recipients of the award include Dokun Isa, who was awarded by the foundation in 2016 for his principled opposition to the ongoing persecution of the Uyghur Muslim minority in the PRC. At a time when China is intent on exporting its censorship abroad and bullying American individuals and companies to toe the party line, and to cover up all of the atrocities that have been committed by the Chinese Communist Party, we need, and we're so grateful to have, brave voices like Mr. Fang, and we need him now more than ever. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you all. Let's
Thank you.
another round of applause.
感谢史密斯议员，感谢共产主义受难者基金会给我这个奖，给我这个机会能到这里和大家见面。
Thank you very much, Congressman Smith. Thank you, the victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. Thank you, you give me this chance to be here to meet you.
在6·4 29年后的今天，还有这么多人依然记得29年前的那个惨案。我作为一个当时的一个亲历者，一个受害者，我对大家表示深深的感谢。
29 years after the tragedy of Tiananmen Square, you all can still remember what happened 29 years ago as one of the victims of this tragedy. I'm so grateful to all of you.
大家都知道，在目前的中国这种情况下，保持29年的记忆其实是不容易的，尽管在美国也是不容易的。
As we all know that under such situation in China, to keep such a memory for 29 years long in China is not easy, as well as not easy to keep such a long memory in the United States of America.
可是我们怎么能忘记29年前那个惨案呢？因为在那一天，有成千甚至上万的和平的市民和学生，被中国政府、被共产党的军队屠杀在北京。
But how can we forget the tragedy 29 years ago, because so many peaceful students, citizens were massacred by the communist military force in Beijing.
我们怎么能够忘记在六部口、在长安街，那坦克冲向和平的学生那一幕惨案？
How can we forget the tragic scene that the tanks rushing to the people in the crossing in Chang'an, in the street of eternal safety, and in Liupukou in Beijing?
所以每当这个时候，我就会想到那些和我一样在坦克下失去生命的那些人。我这些作为那个幸存者，在坦克下的幸存者，我怎么能够忘掉这些？我有责任把我们所经历的那个惨案那个真相，让更多的人知道。
And to this moment, I cannot forget those people who lost their lives under the tanks. I, as a survivor of the tank rushing, I have the responsibility to let more people to know the truth.
尽管在中国，说真话、保持真相是有很大代价的。其实我也知道，当时的很多亲历者、很多参与者，包括一些受害者，迫于中共的种种压力，他们选择了沉默，选择了遗忘。但是其实还有更多的人在坚持真相，在坚守良知。
Although I know it is difficult to speak out the truth in China, but on the contrary, I also know that there are lots of people in China who are still on the side, standing on the side of telling the truth, of keeping their consciousness.
我知道今天这个奖发给我，其实是主要给大家，让大家记住29年前的那个惨案，是发给那些在29年前失去生命的那些6·4的受害者，更是给那些29年来一直在国内坚持抗争、坚持真相的那些勇敢的这些人权的斗士们。
I know granting this award to me is to commemorate, is to granting the award to the people who lost their lives 29 years ago, and what's more, it is further to granting the award to the people who are still keeping their struggles in China, who are still fighting for human rights.
请大家一定要知道，就在现在，天安门那些失去孩子的天安门母亲们，他们还不能去悼念自己的孩子，不能自由的去悼念自己的失去生命的孩子。
As we all know that the Tiananmen mothers who lost their children can still not commemorate their children freely until now.
我还知道我的那些当年64的那些好朋友，像陈云飞、像刘贤斌、像陈卫，他们还在监狱中，仅仅是因为在国内的抗争，他们还在监狱中。当年
And as I know that many of my good friends of the episode of the June the 1st massacre, just like Chen Yunfei, Liu Xianbin, and Chen Lei, they are still being jailed in prison. They are still in prison.
包括像刘晓波先生的太太刘霞女士还没有自由，那些709的家属们还在艰苦的抗争，随时可以被中共迫害投入监狱，我们不能忘掉他们。
And the wife of Mr. Liu Xiaobo is still not, has still no freedom. And we know that the family members of the so-called 709 crackdown of the human rights lawyers, they still don't have freedom. We cannot forget them.
所以我现在很幸运，在海外，我们能做的其实是很有限的，但是我们依然要尽自己最大的努力去争取这些，要让中国更加的有人权。在对抗中共暴政的时候，我们更需要团结起来，更需要做自己最大的努力。
And we should try our best to struggle against the Chinese Communist regime and also that the aim that we are gathering and to
再次感谢史密斯议员。我记得9年前我刚到美国的时候，在和他见面，感受到他那双有力的握手的时候，我感觉到中国有像史密斯议员的这些坚定的支持者，中国的人权有像史密斯议员的这些坚定的支持者，在美国我们感到很有希望。
I'm so grateful to Congressman Smith as I felt his so powerful handshaking 9 years ago as I first met him. I'm so confident that with the support of the American people such like Smith, we, as Chinese, we have hope.
刚才在这里我听了这几位讲员的很多的介绍，其实我知道他们对中国的了解远远超过国内的很多人，非常感谢你们对中国的那种了解和深刻的判断。
As I heard just now from the speakers that I noticed that your understanding of China could be much more than some of our Chinese people, and I thank you very much for your understanding of China.
是的，其实大家现在都知道，目前的中国强有力，中国习近平的政权，这个共产政权的不仅在迫害国内的人们，也一步一步的在威胁世界的和平和自由，这是我们需要面对的。
As we all know that the Chinese Communist regime is now so powerful, as it is not only persecuting its own people inside China, and it's also trying to persecute the people all over the world. That's what we have to notice and be aware of.
所以在这里，我也感谢大家能够在这里共同的去讨论我们如何应对这些问题，这是我们需要真正面对的，怎么去抵制中共政权的对全世界的威胁，这是需要像史密斯议员、像这些学者们一起共同研讨的问题。希望大家能够尽早的去解决中共的这个威胁。
And that's how can we deal with this emerging problem, and how just like what Congressman Smith and all the participating people here gather together and discuss. That's that's the issue we should all join together to discuss to avoid the threats from the Chinese Communist Party.
再次感谢大家，谢谢。
Thank you very much. Thank you.